You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Connor.
And I'm Alex. And today we are here to talk about Star Wars.
As we normally do. And we're going to talk about one of the subjects that I find quite fascinating as a nerdling man-child, but also just a general fan of Star Wars, and that will be that of the lightsaber.
We have previously talked about lightsabers in other episodes, their role as an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. But today we are going to take a more granular look at lightsaber lore, and look at the different lightsaber forms and styles that are used in lightsaber combat, both lightsaber v lightsaber and in more general, settings when a Jedi or Sith or someone else is fighting against non-lightsaber users.
Yeah, this is one of those parts of lore, of world building, that I'm not really sure what side of the fence I fall on because, there are eight of these lightsaber forms, and there don't need to be eight lightsaber forms, but at the same time, there's something to be appreciated and respected out of different styles of combat. And reading through these, there is a progression of style, whether it be through attitude or just aggressiveness. It makes for an interesting consideration, especially with which characters they have decided use these lightsaber forms.
Yeah, so in some ways I find there's, as Connor said, seven formal lightsaber forms plus a couple other grab bag ones that don't technically fall in one through seven. They're literally called forms one through seven, though they have fancier names than that.
Mhm.
But I find this a little bit reductive in that we have characters with very unique fighting styles that are intended to say things about their personality, such as uh, Count Dooku's fencing style or
Mhm.
Ahsoka Tano's dual lightsaber style, evolving from her original single lightsaber reverse grip style. We
Mhm.
have Obi-Wan with his signature lightsaber above his head defensive stance, and we have Anakin Skywalker at first mimicking that stance and then going into a very aggressive style. And then Darth Vader, who just overwhelms everyone by hacking them to pieces, not really so much as a style, as kind of like a butcher with a lightsaber.
Mhm.
So all of these are used visually as a way to tell things about the characters. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we do live in a world where there are actual fighting styles used in swordplay and things for various types of weapons. So I can also see the intrinsic want to have these specific
Mhm.
styles as world items of world building. So Connor, back to you.
Yeah, I imagine these must have been featured in a video game like Knights of the Old Republic, where you got or even Jedi uh, Outcast, where you had to be able to decide what kind of lightsaber combat that you wanted to explore as a light or dark side user. Um, but there's just so dang many of these. It's kind of like going into the ins and outs of like in Legends, all of the different crystals that could power a lightsaber. One of those crystals in Legends was Kyber. And now they've just sort of condensed all of lightsaber crystals down into the umbrella of Kyber. So uh, there are a lot of these. There's a lot of variation, but whether or not they're kept or necessarily respected by the different choreographers of the different Star Wars shows is, to be decided. But it's still interesting to look at because I think Darth Vader is the one that kind of gets me because, practically speaking, we have a man in a thick black suit of plastic and leather who doesn't have the same maneuverability as someone in cloth robes. So, of course, those two, Anakin and Darth, are going to have different fighting styles. But there's canonicity behind that in discussing what Darth Vader actually had to do in order to uh, make up for some of the loss in mobility that he had. So that's where it started to pique my interest, just to see how valid are these lightsaber forms and if something interesting can be made out of them. So, any thoughts before we jump in?
I think the only context I want to provide is that when we're talking about these lightsaber forms and styles, is there are two aspects to every lightsaber duel in Star Wars, where these additional forms can add an aesthetic flair and a world building side, but um, every lightsaber duel between characters in Star Wars is an emotional confrontation in the same way it's a physical contest. So This is not like a superhero battle where we can say the stronger person will always win because
Hmm.
um, there, one power scaling in anything is a ridiculous fandom pastime, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So this is again an emotional confrontation. Um, and I will maybe use one of our recent confrontations, such as Baylan Skoll versus Ahsoka Tano, as our maybe our example of that. And two is the fighting style chosen by any particular character is intended both as an aesthetic piece of their character, but also intended to reveal things about their character. It
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense that Obi-Wan Kenobi favors a defensive, guarded, less aggressive style. And it also makes sense that Ahsoka Tano, reckless teen, has a more reckless and evasive fighting style that then evolves into a highly aggressive, less defensive fighting style after serving under General Anakin Skywalker for many years. So I think you need to view it as a character building moment, and then when there are duels, to put it in the context of every duel in Star Wars is an emotional confrontation. So that said, Connor, do you want to start us off? And we'll don't need to go terribly, not going to we read you the Wikipedia article here,
Yeah.
but let's talk about the various lightsaber forms and what we think about them.
Well, describe them, give the description, and a couple of examples of who uses them. So the first form, Form 1, is Shi-Cho, otherwise known as the Way of the Sarlacc. Why that is, I am not entirely sure, but it's an old lightsaber form that's traditionally taught to Padawans. It's meant to be sort of simplistic, uh, trying to disarm a foe, maim them rather than kill them. So the preeminent use of this form would be one Obi-Wan Kenobi. And we can see him disarming many an opponent in the sake of avoiding further uh, violent conflict. They also give, for some reason, Kit Fisto this form as his primary use. So I think just in the abstract, when I think of your most traditional Jedi, it's going to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's the first Jedi we ever meet in terms of just the timeline of the screen. Um, he is who all the other Jedi are set to follow and resemble. So it makes sense that he has this form. Kit Fisto, not entirely sure. I don't have a very strong read on this Aquilian fish man.
So I would say so. Shicho, being the um, oldest form of lightsaber combat, would make sense for Kit Fisto to use because he is amphibious. So he needs a versatile style that is not overly complicated, that can
Mhm.
function between being underwater, being falling through the air into the water, being on land, because it doesn't make him any less powerful. He is still able to defeat General Grievous in combat in the Clone Wars, for example, and is still one of the most successful generals of the Clone Wars period. So the fact that he uses a simple lightsaber style, I think, is not intended to show that Kit Fisto is in any way less of a
Oh no.
duelist or powerful figure. But I think we can view this as he's not a one about flashy movements or that requires a great deal of fighting style or a great deal of uh, it's his inherent athleticism and the different environments he inhabits instead, lend him to this simpler, more straightforward fighting style.
Yeah, it's the same with Kenobi. He's no lesser for using a simpler fighting style. It's simply more elegant. It's more practical. It doesn't have the flair of emotion behind it. It's simply about combat for the sake of combat, defense, attack, things like that. So it makes a lot of sense for your first form of Jedi combat, lightsaber combat. Um, Moving on to the next, Form 2, Makashi. So this one is a little bit more aggressive, but it leans more into a balletic grace. So Count Dooku is the one that comes to mind here, that fencing style that's so much more about the flourishing and uh I don't know why Pirates of the Caribbean comes to mind just because there's so much fencing in that movie, but imagine this is not your Captain Jack Sparrow type of combat. This is more of a Commodore's stance. So other Jedi that we see are Coyote Mundi, Asajj Ventress makes a lot of sense coming from Count Dooku as a teacher, and also the Grand Inquisitor, which I think falls very much in line with his personality, being somewhat more elegant and regal. Uh, one's confidence and uh, brashness, I think, would come across well in this stance. Uh, thoughts on your end?
Yeah, so I'm kind of adapting this also to the most recent video game that we've seen where there's actually a depiction of a Jedi who switches between different stances, which is Cal
Mhm.
Kestis in Jedi Survivor. And he picks up, I think, 4 or 6 different lightsaber stances through the game. I think 5 actually. So you have, um, and so one of those, the most basic, they call it just the single bladed lightsaber style, which is a mix of several of these other forms,
Mhm.
but where he uses one blade. But he does pick up a crossguard lightsaber, which does have aspects of this Form 2 style in it,
Oh, sure.
where it is about more deliberate, aggressive movements. Um, Cal Kestis's crossguard lightsabers also gets has more weight to it because with the double kyber crystal he has, so it's almost more like a great sword for him. But
Mhm.
definitely elements to the Makashi style in how Cal Kestis wields his crossguard lightsaber.
Yes, this very much feels to me, even though there are some light side users who utilize it. We have Coyote Mundi, who, he's a bit of an egghead or zucchini head. I'm not exactly sure which would be more accurate, but he's someone who you can tell has a certain amount of pomp in his persona. You just have to look at his sleeves to tell that. But generally, outside of that, this seems very much to be a fighting style that leans itself to dark side users because the sense of uh, flair and aggression is very much a dark side attitude. You don't hear about
Um,
many light side users who are going to uh, use aggression and a sense of panache in order to undo their enemies.
yeah, I wouldn't say that this is inherently a dark side style. I would say it's just more like we see Master Mundi and Master Luminara both use this
Hmm.
style, and both are rather, I would say, as you said, you could view them as either pompous or as fairly formal Jedi. And so I think
Sure.
this is intended to show like the formality and also skill of their movements.
Definitely fair.
And I think the dark side association just comes out of Dooku because the um, 2 of the other dark side users we see were Dooku students. Because he
Mhm.
taught the Grand Inquisitor when he was still a Jedi, and he taught Asajj Ventress, who is another person who uses this style.
Yeah. I
So
kind of
I
lump
think
Kylo Ren in with that too, just because of his is more brutalistic, and I don't know if he is going to be represented later, but just having a bit more of that. Um, there's a sense of play where I don't know when I look at someone using a fencing foil or a katana, there's a sense of strategy, whereas with a broadsword, there's still strategy, but it's more so about that attack. But um, anyway, it's I agree with you. It's not one that is necessarily a dark side form, but it can be leaned into for its more darker attitudes.
yeah. So yeah, that's a Form 2 Makashi, which is takes the style Form 1 and then adds, rather than just being a versatile all around, adds the element of a duelist's aggression to it, and of course always take advantage of the inherent, sort of athleticism that a user of the Force possesses by being able to augment their physical abilities.
Sure.
So that takes us on to then Form 3, which is called Soresu.
Also known as the way of the Minoc or the resilience form. When I think of Minocs, I don't think of defense and resilience. I think more of jump scares and cold, nasty, wet caves, but for each his own. When it comes to this form, this is more of your, I would say if the first form of Shi-Cho was more of your Padawan Obi-Wan, this is more of your wartime Obi-Wan. It's much more of a defensive style. It's used for blocking projectiles. This is something that we see Kanan Jarrus use. I think that makes a lot of sense for his character because when he enters into lightsaber combat at first, it's not to overcome his opponent. It's, he has his back up against the wall and has no other choice but to defend himself using a lightsaber, defend his team with one. So, you know, the first form is very much of how can I uh disarm my opponent as quickly and efficiently as possible, whereas Soresu is more about how can I divert this and defend, much more of your traditional Jedi uh, form of combat,
And,
on paper
and
at least.
yeah, and the most renowned user of Form 3 was Obi-Wan Kenobi,
Hmm.
who was known to be incredibly survivable, but also not very aggressive, sometimes to the point where he could have been more aggressive and ended battles sooner.
Hmm.
And also, Soresu was one of the first uh, lightsaber forms that's mentioned in the new canon that we talk about, because when Kanan Jarrus, as Connor mentioned, fights the Grand Inquisitor, trying to use Soresu to, as a defensive style, he, having analyzed the Jedi archives, recognizes that he was instructed by Jedi Master Depa Billaba and mentions his use of Soresu, and then deploys his own Makashi style to pick apart Kanan's defenses, which is why Kanan then uses a different style in their final confrontation when he defeats the Grand Inquisitor, a style we will get to later, by
Excellent.
deliberately changing up his lightsaber style to pick apart the Grand Inquisitor's defenses, who, well, he says, "Oh, I can pick apart and analyze you," ends up being the victim of his own. He, it's like, I have the technical aspect, but has lost the emotional duel to Kanan at that point.
Hmm. So yeah, this is we're still in the realm of tradition. I think if Shicho is your beginning form, Makashi's one leg that you can venture as far as the more aggressive, Soresu more so the defensive maneuvering. But any thoughts on Form 3 before we get to the next form?
The only other part about Soresu I want to mention is that it is also the form that focuses on deflecting blaster bolts.
Hmm.
So when we see Jedi like deflecting tons of blaster bolts, we that is typically them using the form 3, and in fact, it is a form that Ahsoka Tano, who's not very good at, is forced to adopt to during Anakin Skywalker's training, as shown in Tales of the Jedi, which is one reason she was able to survive Order 66.
Hmm.
So
I had
again,
forgotten about
taking
that
this,
episode. That was fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, so taking this sort of world building aspect and applying it to Ahsoka, who we'll see is a master of Form 4 and another more aggressive form as well, and then forcing her to use aspects of Form 3, the defensive one, because her master is concerned that she will get shot and die in war. Uh,
As one does. I shouldn't laugh, but yes. Uh, But yeah, leading into Form 4. So Form 4 is very aggressive. This is Ataru, and your most renowned Jedi using this form is going to be Anakin Skywalker. So unlike Form 2, this one's not about elegance. It's not about trying to outmaneuver your opponent so much as it is about just brute forcing your opponent. We do have Qui-Gon Jinn as an inspiration for that, and I find this interesting because Qui-Gon, I mean, as a Maverick Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi's more of your balance. Qui-Gon Jinn leads to be a little bit more bombastic, a little bit more uh, free thinking. So I can kind of see him being more aggressive as a lightsaber duelist. He is
yeah,
a
so
tall, strong man. He can take care of opponents and Gungans rather easily.
so all the Jedi that we see use this aggressive Ataru Form 4. So it's about acrobatic, and it's mostly about open spaces and combining the use of the Force to augment your physical abilities. Where Makashi is all about elegant movements in a duelist's one,
Mhm.
Ataru is about overwhelming your opponent with your just raw force ability and the power that a lightsaber brings you. It's not limited in the same way a sword is. It can cut through anything, and so the use of the lightsaber in battle in these wide open spaces then takes full advantage of both the Jedi's lethality, honestly, which is why I think we see more Jedi starting to deploy the form in a more clone in the Clone Wars era, when there's
Oh yeah.
war has come upon the galaxy. So the short list of those we see using this style are Yoda, who, if he has to open it, if he
100%.
has to pull
Yeah.
his lightsaber, this battle should be over as soon as possible. He is not here to do an elegant duel. He is here to overwhelm you with his lightsaber. Qui-Gon Jinn in the same way. Qui-Gon he's a maverick, but if he has to draw his lightsaber, the fight should be over as soon as possible.
Hmm.
Aayla Secura using the dual lightsaber
Oh,
aspect of
sure.
it. This is the style that Ezra Bridger adopts. Again, he has a
Makes
more
sense.
aggressive inclination than his master, Kanan Jarrus. And then this is the other form that the Grand Inquisitor uses when he brags about being able to switch between lightsaber forms, and
Sure.
adapts to fighting. And then, of course, we already mentioned Anakin. This is the when he's not using his master's Seresu style, and defensively,
Mm.
he is using this Ataru style, and it fits his personality. So I think it says a lot about each of the characters that we've talked about. If you think about how the depiction of the sort of aggressive style we can see, and this is some of our paragons of Jedihood, such as Yoda, but the Jedi, while being defenders of the peace, and they say they're not warriors, but they have never ever been depicted as pacifists. And so when someone has to get lightsabered, they get lightsabered for the peace and justice of the galaxy. So when Yoda's like, well, if I got a lightsaber you, we're going to do it as fast as possible. And yes, Connor, I'm using lightsabered as a verb.
I mean, it's fair. You know, how many creatures have gotten lightsabered in their time? But I'm glad you brought up Yoda because there's one thing that you've helped me like come to light on, and it's the moment of Order 66 where Yoda just immediately slaughters a clone for survival. We see Ahsoka try to rationalize with the clones. Yoda is much more of a long-term thinker, and I think with how much of a pinnacle of the Jedi peace that he is, he would still, of course, absolutely try to end the conflict as soon as possible. And he has the might to do that, which is very frightening for anyone that goes up against Yoda.
Yeah, Yoda is a frightening force if you have to fight against him. We see that in the very first episode of the Clone Wars series, where the Separatists send a small army against him, and all they get back is scrap metal. Um, and I think that's also a nice. We see Ahsoka, who has been raised by Anakin Skywalker and trained by him, has an attachment to the clones, and of course we applaud her moral actions, but this is making her a good person, but perhaps not a good Jedi, which is why she doesn't even identify with that label anymore.
Mhm.
Uh, Yoda is a very good Jedi. He has the detachment necessary. He decides that the clones are now enemies, and it's necessary for his own survival and the survival of those he cares about to kill these men who are trying to kill him. And so he does that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think he is emotionally mature enough to make that decision and has been around enough where Ahsoka is too attached to Rex and the people under her command.
For
Whether that's
sure.
the best decision for her, we don't know, but it's the one she makes and it makes sense for her character.
Mhm.
We're getting a little far afield into Order 66. Listen to our previous episode, episode
Exactly.
66, about the execution of Order 66 to hear more about that. But yes, that is Form 4, Ataru, the overwhelm you with my awesome force powers and lightsaber form.
Excellent. So moving on to five, this is where things start to turn a little bit. It's a little bit confusing because there are two different names for this form, and it is Form 5, Shien slash Djem So. So these are physically demanding styles of combat. They're almost like it's a fluid way of switching between two different ways of combat because you're moving from very careful defense to all-out attacks. So it seems very strategic. It seems very much planned. This isn't your, I'm going to use all of my Jedi reflexes in order to get me through this battle. This is taking some of that Form 2 panache, but it's playing the long game and really making sure that one can overcome their enemy. And this is the preeminent form of Darth Vader, who, as much as I love Star Wars and I love the man, Darth Vader has some clumsy lightsaber battles because he is a giant man wearing a giant metal helmet. That's the practicality of it. But ignore A New Hope. Think about Empire Strikes Back, where we have this long-standing cat and mouse chase between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, where Vader is toying with Luke. I can't think of. I mean, I think that Ahsoka would be the parallel to this because she is so much of a clever fighter, where she uses this to simply just overcome conflict. Darth Vader does this to manipulate his opponents.
Yeah, so Form 5, which has the two variants. So there's Gemso, which is the variant used. It's intended to block and just use the force to defend against the initial strike, and then immediately overwhelm the opponent. This is what Darth Vader does.
Mhm.
So, we see him. Han Solo shoots at him. He deflects the bolts, and he could have killed Han Solo. Luke attacks him first. He deflects and blows Luke through the airlock or the window on Bespin. Um, his first fight with Kenobi during the Kenobi show. Uh, Obi-Wan attacks him. He weathers Obi-Wan's first assault and then pushes Obi-Wan into the fire. So we see this is the quintessential form for Vader, where it's
Mhm.
also his slow, menacing walk where he just deflects blaster bolt after blaster bolt and then kills everyone in front of him. That is Form 5. It is also the form used by, in its Xian variant, is with the reverse grip, and that is what Ahsoka Tano, his student,
Mm.
uses as well. So, uh, and we see her use this both in the Clone Wars series, with a both single and double blade reverse grip, and she also, in her duel with Morgan Elsbeth in season 2 of The Mandalorian, originally is using a single is a non-reversed grip in a Form 6, but then switches back to Xian Form 5 when she is disarmed of one of her lightsabers.
And I would be remiss to say, this is also Starkiller, Galen Merrick's legend lightsaber form, also a student of Anakin Skywalker. So even if Anakin wasn't using this lightsaber style during his prominence as a knight, it's what it seems like he was most comfortable teaching. So a little complex. It's a very strategic lightsaber form, one that very much kind of fits the bill for what Vader and Ahsoka are prepared to do.
Yeah, very samurai-like in the fact
Mhm.
that you take a single blow, deflect it, and defeat the opponent in another blow. So that would be Form 5.
Mhm. Form 6 is Naman, and this one's kind of nebulous because it's a sort of a menagerie of taking the strengths of other combats without their weaknesses. Largely, it's utilizing the Force during lightsaber combat. Uh, this reminds me of, I don't know why, but Vader using his lightsaber to direct Force projectiles at Luke in Empire Strikes Back. This one I have a little bit of a hard time wrapping my head around.
Yeah. So this one is the most popular form of lightsaber combat among the Jedi at the time of the Clone Wars because it emphasizes being primarily focusing on use of the Force, with the lightsaber just there as a tool to resolve the battle if necessary. So, um, rather than like being Form 4, where just overwhelming an opponent was too aggressive, this and if you're not acrobatic enough for Form 4 or 5,
Mhm.
uh, this one relies on your knowledge of the Force. So yes, where Vader is just throwing projectiles at Luke holding his lightsaber in front of him, when we see Yoda holding his lightsaber, but then engaging in a battle of Force objects with Dooku. Um, but if we don't see a specific like style being used, that would be Form 6 here. This is one of the forms that Balin Skoll adopts before he switches into a more specialized style to defeat Ahsoka Tano when before eventually he then just begins overwhelming her with raw strength. But when uh, we this is so the other primary practitioner that we see of Form 6 that's very obvious is Darth Maul, who
Mhm.
is constantly force pushing, force pulling, setting objects, physically augmenting himself, especially after he gets his robot legs.
Mhm.
So,
That makes
um,
sense.
yeah,
This is the first one I would say let's vote out because this one is, I would argue that every lightsaber combat form requires the Force, just because a lightsaber can be clumsily wielded by anyone, but someone who's, trying to maneuver that to such a degree where they do not cause undue harm to themselves or others would require a little bit of Force perception. So to have a form that's just, oh, it's lightsaber combat with the Force, I would say this is the only one so far where I've been like,
no.
we can
See,
do without.
so I'm going to say that Form 6 is the war turtle of the Squirtle that was Form 1. So this just takes the general like combat and just takes that to a more elegant and advanced stage where you are now skilled enough in the Force and the lightsaber to be adaptable to anything that's happening around you.
Sure, you've
Uh,
graduated. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I think, and it's mentioned that this was, the forms were developed in order, which is why they're numbered, and it's said that this
Hmm.
is the most popular form by the time that uh, the Jedi were at their peak of their power. So,
Oh yeah.
if you don't see a specific fighting style being used, it's probably just Niman, which is generally like you're good with a lightsaber, you're good with the Force, you combine them excellently with whatever your physical characteristics are, and you haven't chosen to use a different style. That's Form 6.
So it's yeah, it's a all I would assume that all of the Jedi have gone through forms 1 through 5. And six again is that menagerie, it's that potpourri of forms that encompasses many different aspects and ties it into the Force.
Yeah, we get a throwaway line from Barriss Ophi to Ahsoka saying that she stuck to Form 5 too much, and if she had used Form 6, meaning, stop with your reverse bladed lightsaber aggressive style trying to overwhelm me and just wear me down with your greater force power, then you could have defeated me.
Hmm. So
All
yeah,
right.
so it's nebulous, but the next form gets me excited. Um, the next form is Form 7, which is Juyo or Vapad. And I think that, you know, uh, Juyo is more so kind of a dark side form. It it is fueled by aggression and it's fueled by negative emotion. This is very much a Star Killer lightsaber stance. This is I don't know about Darth Maul. Probably not Darth Maul. He was more choreographed, but Kylo Ren, I would definitely see being a Juyo combatant. But it was developed into Vapad, which I'm of course pronouncing correctly, uh, and not checking the Wikipedia right now to double check that. And of course, it doesn't have the name of it, but this is all about taking that aggression and that negative energy, but not feeding into it. We've talked about, do gray Jedi exist where they can take the aggression, the anger, but not fuel into it? This is something that Mace Windu does. Samuel L. Jackson is a special kind of man with a certain amount of esteem. And when Samuel L. Jackson says, George Lucas, give me a purple lightsaber, George Lucas says yes, even though there are no purple lightsabers. So this is Mace Windu's own form because Samuel L. Jackson is such a badass. Just to trickle down to having his own badass lightsaber combat form.
Yeah. So other people I'd say that use the Juyo form are Maul in his more aggressive areas when he's being less acrobatic and more just overwhelming. Mostly when we see him in Rebels, when he has lost the ability to be so, um, I would say, versatile and just is now at this dark side stage of the lightsaber. He is now overwhelming people with the Juyo style. Kylo Ren, as much as he has a style, is falling
Hmm.
into this probably a very rudimentary version of it. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and then we do in the non-dark side version of and Juyo was actually banned by the Jedi Council because so many practitioners kept falling to the dark side.
Not surprising.
So Vapad was developed by Mace Windu and others to allow this, aggressive style of overwhelming immediate force to be channeled appropriately. But there were very few Jedi who were authorized to study this. Mace Windu and Depa Billaba being um, one of them. This is also
Hmm.
the style that Cal Kestis uses when he um, is tapping into the dark side in Jedi Survivor. He notably gets less defensive and just overwhelming with his force powers.
So yeah, whenever you're feeding into that darkness, that's why I'm like taking a look at all of the lightsaber forms. So they're not strictly Jedi or Sith, but looking at the ones that Sith would primarily use, I would say Form 2, Makashi, Form 5, the Shien, Jim So, and then this Form 7 of Juyo would be where your Darksiders are navigating.
Yeah, but we also see Anakin Skywalker after falling and becoming Darth Vader still using the Soresu style to
Hmm.
defend himself against Obi-Wan. So
Oh yeah.
um, we also see Baylan Skoll. He starts out when he's dueling Ahsoka. He starts out in a standard Naman style, and then he quickly switches to a overwhelming Ataru style, losing his
Hmm.
raw and Naman style to just overwhelm Ahsoka with raw power once he realizes that uh, she is conflicted and does not have the power to stand up to him. And then there is what I think before we just dive into as an overall analysis of
Yeah.
um, some styles here. There's two other final style options just to mention. Generally, any of these styles can be combined with what's called Jarkai, which
Hmm.
is just dual wielding lightsabers, or you have a double bladed lightsaber, or you're dual wielding double bladed lightsabers if you are um, Master Pong Krell, the most terrible of all Jedi.
And terrifying. Uh, but I would say this is kind of like a subset. This is your minor, and your other lightsaber forms are your master degree. Because I think that you can take the disciplines of any lightsaber form and you can have a more passive, defensive dual wielding style or a more aggressive, passionate one. So Jarkai should just be a sort of a like subtext to whatever lightsaber form someone uses.
Yeah. So people that we see wielding two lightsabers, Cal Kestis has a Jarkai Ataru form that we see him use
Mhm.
in the Fallen Order. So he's aggressive with it. His defensive capability is lower, and he uses two lightsabers. We see him use a Soresu Jarkai style when he has his dual blade lightsaber, which is the most defensive style that he uses. And then we see him do a um, Juyo style when he's flirting with the dark side, just broad, overwhelming strikes, and then
Sure.
into a more of that um, cross guard, deliberate Akari Form 2 style when he has a cross bladed lightsaber. So
Mhm.
switching back and forth between all of those, very Cal Kestis of him. Um, yeah, and then there's just a brief mention. There are things that are called, we don't have a lot of details on it, but the forbidden styles, which were
AKA the
common
grab
during the
bag of anything that's not covered within these 7 or 8 forms is just a forbidden style.
Yeah. We get very few references to them, just that the Sith largely used them. One of the references we have is that light whips were created by the Jedi to partially fight against the forbidden forms of the Sith. And one of the only current canon characters that we see use a light whip is Vernestra Rwoh, who is a Jedi Padawan or fresh Jedi Knight at the time of the Battle with the
Mhm.
Nihil in the High Republic period, and then has become a seasoned Jedi Master by the time of the Acolyte.
Yeah, prior to this, I think in the, I want to say early 90s, maybe late 80s, there was a comic book character by the name of Lumia, who I've name dropped a couple times. One of my favorites because she's this post-Empire Sith, kind of similar to Mara Jade, uh, but she has a lightsaber whip. And her, like, aesthetically looks more like a couple coils that are electrified. Vanessa Rose looks more like a lightsaber that is also a whip. But I would imagine the same sort of form would be utilized through Legends and canon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
those
that would extend to any kind of lightsaber, pike, spear, axe. I mean, I love going through Wikipedia as much as you do and just seeing some of the crazy Legends material there is out there, like a lightsaber baton that a Wookiee would use. But
Yeah, and we've seen some interesting lightsabers in current canon. Like Visions has lightsaber katanas depicted in a couple of episodes. Uh,
some
but
lightsaber menorahs, depending on your specific anime flourishes, that for
but
umbrellas. But yeah, I think that having a set of forms makes sense because part of Star Wars, like the lineage of the series, is that it's made up of all of these different elements, all of these different pastiches of different cultures. Some of that is your samurai film, it's your martial arts film, and having these different combat styles. So I think it's something that Star Wars can really dig into, not necessarily have to build upon because we already have, 7.5, 9 lightsaber forms here. But I think that it does give some interesting look into the different personalities of the characters who utilize them.
I think that is one of the most compelling parts of the lightsaber form discussion that I enjoy is just seeing what does it say about the characters who use it.
Mhm.
From Kit Fisto, where lightsaber combat, he's good at it, but it's not his focus, and he's more about being in tune with the Force in the various environments he's in,
Mhm.
to the overly aggressive Ahsoka, who never learned to stop and take a breath from her master, and that comes back to bite her in the future.
And how that's
And then
reflected in Darth Vader's later style as well. That's an interesting tidbit to pick up on.
yeah, and then we can even see aspects of this Juyo style, the overwhelming dark side approach with Kylo Ren.
Mhm.
So, so I
Yeah.
appreciate it as a world building, and also I think it is. We see a lot of duels that happen after Order 66 are, Luke never received formal lightsaber training except a little bit from Yoda. So
Mhm.
he's never much of a duelist. So I think we would call Luke an expert of the Naman style, where he
Mhm.
forms six, where he just is so in tune with the Force that he allows the Force to guide his movements.
Oh,
And
yes.
he's very, very powerful in that way, and is a great warrior. But Luke isn't doing any double backflips to um, deflect 17 blaster bolts and all that. He is more. He certainly could, but that's not his default, like it would be for Ahsoka.
He's
Uh,
feel and not technique. It's kind of like a similar kind of comparison to guitar players, where you have skilled guitar players who are all about technique, and you have skilled guitar players who are all about feel and tone, both able to get to wildly successful heights, but just from two very different points of view.
yeah, and see the battle in the woods in Ahsoka, where we have Sabine, who's fighting against a former Inquisitor and a Padawan, using all of her Mandalorian battle skills and such to survive the attack. Sort of this frantic battle using all of the tools she has had her disposal. Compare that to the duel between Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll when Ahsoka reaches the promontory where Baylan is waiting for her, where these are two masters, both formally trained by the Jedi, meeting to use their duelist skills against each other. Where they clash a couple of times, they switch between different styles to try to take advantage of each other's weaknesses.
Mhm.
Baylan just tries to overwhelm her with raw strength. Uh, Ahsoka attempts to use his inferior agility against him, but underestimates him. And later on, there in their future confrontation, Baylan tries the same trick, but Ahsoka, now more in tune with herself, knows that winning the battle does not necessarily mean killing Baylan, and simply
Mhm.
declines to engage him in the same way, which Baylan accepts.
And I have a little test for you uh, at this point now that you are the master in lightsaber forms. Um, we have the famous battle because I think that the battle between Ahsoka and Balin is just a battle of masters, both coming from different places, different levels of experience. When we have the final battle between two masters in Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul, what forms is Obi-Wan Kenobi oscillating between during the beginning and middle of that battle?
So he starts out in his Soresu form, which is his standard, but then afterwards, when he faces off with Maul, and Maul rants at him for a while. He then adopts his master's form of Ataru to lure Darth Maul in and defeats him in the single stroke that is the um, sort of quintessential Ataru maneuver.
I think that makes sense. He is so in tune with the Force, with his surroundings, that he is able to circumvent Maul's attack just on pure instinct. It's kind of like a Ultra Instinct in Dragon Ball Z for those of you who are keeping up with Dragon Ball Super. But just being able to react to your surroundings on a moment's notice is what a true Jedi Master can do.
Yeah, and we see Obi-Wan adopt the same style that he used to defeat Maul the first time, but then deliberately adopt his master Qui-Gon's style, stance, grip, in the same way that, and then Maul tries the same move that he once did to kill Qui-Gon Jinn, but Obi-Wan sees it coming and defeats Maul in a single stroke,
Mhm.
which is one of my favorite lightsaber duels at all. It lasts about 10 seconds of actual lightsabers and 15 minutes of psychological buildup, and it is the best thing in Star Wars.
Yeah, I think it wraps up. I began this episode a little hot, where I was a little skeptical about the need for so many lightsaber combat forms. I really think there's only, I mean, even the one makes sense. If it's a Taru, it's just the master's stance. But we take a look at, I would say, two of the best lightsaber combat scenes would be in Ahsoka, and it would be in that final confrontation between Maul and Kenobi in Rebels. And it's all based on the forms that they're taking, and it demonstrates their mastery without having any sort of dialogue or exposition necessary to tell us how great these people are. We just see it in their action. So, yeah, start off the episode critiquing an aspect of Star Wars that the fans have expanded only to realize that it has only made the series richer in itself.
Yeah, I don't care if they have numbers and names and all that, but having visually distinct differences that then give storytelling details as a show and don't tell. Like, this isn't Star Wars is largely not an anime where we have someone in their head is like, now I must switch to form 3. This shall counter as form 2. But he
Hmm.
saw me coming and I switched to form 6. I must quickly deploy the forbidden form X. We don't have that in Star Wars. It just happens
Yeah.
entirely visually,
Hmm.
and that is what I enjoy.
Oh yeah. Not that I would hate an anime that dealt in that like a Bleach of Star Wars, where we get to see them, internal monologuing about the different forms they're taking. I would love that. I have that kind of nerd inside of me, but in the visual media, it's not necessary. Um, but yeah, I think that this, what I always come back to in these episodes is that there is just a richness to Star Wars that is absent in other media, and something so benign as 7 or 8 different lightsaber combat forms can help paint so much depth into the landscape that is Star Wars.
Well said, Connor.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, Alex, on lightsaber forms?
That is about it. And I think just the one other thing that I'll say in comparison is that this also, you can see this as just a form of visual storytelling in many ways that Star Wars tells. So we see when Luke confronts Vader in episode 5, we don't really see him using any particular like lightsaber style, whereas Vader is very deliberate in his movements. And then even in episode 6, Luke was never going to defeat Vader in an outright duel. So they're just sort of hacking at each other emotionally until it becomes deliberately a duel of emotion between them. And the lightsabers are just there as extensions of the Force between them, which is sort of what a confrontation between a Jedi and a Sith should be. So I don't
Mhm.
think we can let the window dressing get in the way of how every duel in Star Wars is ultimately an emotional conflict. So, I mean, just to dissect a couple quick ones, we have Baylan Skoll versus Ahsoka, where this is Ahsoka is conflicted about her apprentice, her choice of action, has been repressing her emotions and her complicated feelings about Anakin and her master. When she comes to terms with herself after seeing a forced vision of Anakin, she is then able to recognize Baylan's faults more easily and win without having to even defeat him in combat. And then, so she loses that confrontation not because she is less technically skilled, but because she is less in tune with the Force and
Mhm.
loses the emotional battle. And we see this between Maul and Obi-Wan the second time, where Maul has not grown or changed at all as a person since he first killed Qui-Gon Jinn. He is the same wrathful, full of hate person. And so he cannot adapt and change to the same
Mhm.
opponent who is then able to easily defeat him because Obi-Wan has grown and changed, accepted, repented, and grown as a person. And so defeats his static opponent with a single blow. And the lightsaber forms are a way to visually depict that, but the emotional core of them is what's truly important.
Oh yeah. It all comes from the motivation of where the characters are coming from. And I think even in a lightsaber battle where we don't have the lightsabers uh, coming into contact whatsoever, just like the battle between Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker's ghost, we see this alteration between styles and just how Kylo's more, I would say, somewhat juvenile, aggressive tactic is nothing against a master of Luke's caliber, even if Luke didn't have the same training that Kylo did. It all comes down to the emotion and the experience of the characters.
So that's all I have to say about the Star Wars lightsaber forms, Connor. It has been a pleasure to talk about them with you today. Thank you to our
Likewise.
listeners who gave it a go.
And yeah, I think this is a little bit more I would say content than just, oh, what about orange lightsabers? What would an orange lightsaber be like? I think this gives a little bit uh more of a visual of what these fan inventions actually mean. So thank you for that. And thank you to our fans for listening. We look forward to sharing more Star Wars insights moving forward.
Yeah, join us next week for the next installment of our ongoing investigation of Force powers about Force ghosts. Until
All right.
then, this has been Talking Star Wars.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.